The fifth step is an ancient and honorable step coming down to us way back in the prophets, back in the most ancient of writings. The fifth step is something which was recognized from early on, that it was necessary for us in order to have complete spiritual growth to be willing to admit to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. We find this expressed in the Proverbs, we find it expressed in the book of James and in Paul's letter to the Ephesians. We find the same instructions in the Koran, and if you read Buddhist writings, you'll find it's there too. This is an ancient concept, and it's of immense spiritual value. It is not enough for us to admit to ourselves and to God what we have found to be objectionable, what we have found to have been our faults, our wrongs. We must go this next step, which is to admit these things to another human being. And we found out why that is so on page 73, at the top of the page. We go down 6 lines, talking about people who skipped this step, who are not willing to face another human being. They only thought they had lost their egoism and fear. They only thought they had humbled themselves, but they had not learned enough of humility, fearlessness, and honesty in the sense we find it necessary until they told someone else all their life story. Down at the bottom of that page, the last line, we must be entirely honest with somebody if we expect to live long or happily in this world. And many times as sponsors, you're going to find that your sponsees are afraid of this step. They will dawdle around with their third step or their fourth step, wanting to avoid what they feel is going to be extremely embarrassing, and they're very frightened by the prospect of having to let another human being know exactly what's going on with them. And so it's really important for you when you're working with somebody who's new and you see that they're holding back, to explain to them that this is something not only which they must do, but that you are not sitting in judgment upon them at all. That the only thing you're going to be looking for is to see if you can help them to recognize what it is that's wrong with them that needs to be fixed. That one of the primary purposes of the fifth step is to not only recognize our defects, but also to recognize what they have done to us and how cancerous and dangerous and destructive they are. And further, to recognize that we cannot get rid of them ourselves. We're going to have God's help. And to become willing that help be given to us, that we be set free from these things which block us from God. And we can see that blockage as we tell our life story. Mainly, it's important for your sponsee to understand that you are not interested in the gory details. That your sole interest is to help them to see what it is that needs to be fixed, that needs to be changed, where they need help in order to go forward with the rest of their lives. Also assure them that whatever it is they say to you will, under no circumstances, ever be repeated to anybody, no matter what the duress might be. that in fact your lips are sealed.
Excuse me, Jim. Is that, well, we should do that all the time, right?
Oh, yes, if anyone who is confiding in you ought to know that their confidences will be observed rigorously.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Tom. It's not just for the fifth step, but the point I'm making here is that we need to take the newcomer and reassure them of this fact. So, and they can see in your tone of voice and in your body language and also in your record that you're telling the truth. That nothing that they say to you goes further, and that you are not there to judge them. And under those circumstances, we can usually allay enough of their fears that they'll be willing to do it. Please also notice that there are a number of things which are the product of the fifth step, which are literally unobtainable otherwise. We must do this. Humility and honesty and fearlessness being but three of them. Those three, however, happen to be utterly indispensable. Also, please notice that it is in the fifth step that we learn enough honesty and enough humility and enough fearlessness. Not in the first step, not in the seventh step, not in the other step, not in any of that phony baloney stuff that they call the principles behind the steps. Those things are irrelevant because they're made up stuff that isn't even intelligent when you examine the big book. So here we find three things that we know are going to be products of a fifth step. In addition to that, the fifth step leads almost everybody much closer to their Creator, puts us a long way down the road toward our spiritual awakening, and is the culminating event which removes from us our fears. Now remember when we studied the fourth step that we found out that the spiritual remedy for fear is in three parts. That first we recognize and write down the fear. And then we tell another human being about the fear, and we take it to God and ask God to remove the fear. And in the fifth step we find that having done those things, that our fears are taken from us. They're gone. We have therefore the complete spiritual answer to fear. No longer do we ever counsel sponsees that they are to walk through fear or that there is appropriate fear. We treat fear and we teach them to treat fear as a mortal enemy. That we need to do whatever it takes to be set free from fear. We also will feel, most of us, that we are on the broad highway, walking hand in hand with the Spirit of the universe. And another thing that happens in the fifth step is that for many, many of us, we realize that the obsession, compulsion to drink alcohol has been removed. Now, all of these things are products of a fifth step. In addition to that, because we have articulated the wrongs and the harm that we've done to others, we have solidified our intention and our desire and our willingness to make amends, to set matters straight. Now all these things, these are all the dynamics of the fifth step. And when you realize what's really going on here, then you see why the fifth step is completely indispensable. It has to be. If you're working with somebody and they refuse to do a fifth step, you can't go on with them. You would be lying to them to tell them that somehow or another they're going to skip that step and it'll be just fine. Ask them to find somebody else to work with them if they're not willing to do it. Now they might not be willing to do it with you. Tell them, fine, you go find a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a doctor or a priest or a rabbi or somebody that you trust, but do it. Do it. Now, if that should happen, and it will happen very occasionally these days, ask them to inquire of the person they're going to give their fifth step to if it would be okay with that person if you were to write them a short letter outlining the purposes of the fifth step and what it is we're looking for in the fifth step. And most of the time they will agree. And so you write them a 2 or 3 page letter setting forth the fifth step and what it's designed to accomplish and what we're looking for, that it is not merely a confession, but it goes far beyond confession. It goes because all of the steps, you see, depend upon and build from those that went before, but they always build toward those which are coming. And so following the fifth step will be 6th and 7th step the same day. We'll get into that later. The 8th step's already been done in the 4th step, and the 9th step follows immediately. And in the 5th step we're building toward 6, 7, 8, and 9, and we're laying the groundwork for 10 and 11. And so we cannot separate these steps. In some of the publications around, even AA publications, they make the terrible mistake of taking the step and treating it as if it were in a vacuum. But none of the steps are in a vacuum. They are all part of a continuum. And each builds upon those that came before and builds toward those which go afterwards. They're all part of an integrated whole. You can no more take one step out and examine it as an individual entity and expect to have the whole story. Then you could take one piece out of a fine watch and say this tells us what this watch is all about. It doesn't work that way. Now, in terms of who is going to hear the fifth step, remember that when the big book was written, we're on page 74 now, there were no sponsors as such. There were people that were identified in the big book as spiritual advisors, but for the most part at that time they were not going to people in the program, in the fellowship, to hear their fifth steps. At first it was someone more or less neutral, usually someone in the Oxford group who was not an alcoholic, or a doctor, or a psychiatrist, or a judge, or someone that they felt they could trust, and especially they would look for somebody who was under a seal of secrecy, who could not by law reveal or could not be forced to reveal what they'd heard. And of course that's not true of us. I found out to my dismay that the courts would be very willing to throw me in prison if I refused to testify. Well, heck, that just goes with the territory, guys. That's part of it. And but this would not be true for your lawyer or your doctor or your priest or your rabbi. They cannot be made to testify, nor can the psychiatrist or psychologist, because they're protected by law. And so in the early days it was not common for people to give their fifth step to another member except those who worked with Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob would hear their life story in his office, and Dr. Bob being a medical guy, they had no fear that he could be forced to reveal their story. So I think Dr. Bob always heard the fifth steps of his people. Now today it's not the same, as we all know, and in most cases the fifth step's going to be heard by the sponsor, you and me. So let's read here what they said, and then we'll recognize that much of this language is dated and relates to their experience at the time in 1930s, late 1930s, when they were going through recovery. Top of page 74, rightly and naturally we think well before we choose the person or persons with whom to take this intimate and confidential step. Those of us belonging to a religious denomination which requires confession must, and of course, will want to go to the properly appointed authority whose duty it is to receive it. Now, just a word of caution there: if you're the sponsor and your sponsee is going to be going to a prelate, a religious person who's would normally receive confession, warn them that it may not be sufficient to simply confess, because it's going to be necessary for them to review their life story in terms of their defects of character, not just their sins. Now, the sins we don't handle unless it happens to be our particular religious bent and we are ordained. We in AA as sponsors don't deal in sin. We don't make those kinds of judgments, and sin is no part of AA. It is a part of religious doctrine, and the fact that it sneaked into the 12 and 12 is basically irrelevant. It happens to be a handy way for people to remember what defects are, but the defects listed in the 12 and 12, many of them are nothing. They may be sins, but they're basically sinful action rather than defects of character. So we need to deal with the defects that are eating us alive, and it may be necessary for your sponsee to both confess to an ecclesiastic and also at least to handle a portion of their fifth step with you, so you can help them to see what it is that they need to have God's help to be free of. Though we have no religious connection, we may still do well to talk with someone ordained by an established religion. We often find such a person quick to see and understand our problem. Of course, we sometimes encounter people who do not understand alcoholics, and that's, of course, one of the great drawbacks to finding a person outside the fellowship, because the misunderstanding of what we suffer from as a disease is rampant. No matter how much people may claim they are sophisticated enough to know that alcoholics have this kind of a medical problem and psychiatric problem, still there's a huge amount of prejudice out there, mainly out of ignorance, not because people are necessarily mean, rotten, or nasty about it, but simply that they don't understand. And so it has grown to be the basic custom now for sponsors to hear the fifth step. If we cannot or would rather not do this, we search out our acquaintance for a closed-mouth, understanding friend. Notice the closed mouth. Understanding would mean, in my book anyway, non-judgmental. Perhaps our doctor or psychologist will be the person. It may be one of our own family. There's a problem there. But we cannot disclose anything to our wives or our parents which will hurt them and make them unhappy. Now, it's important for us to realize that this is a segue from here into the ninth step as well. Because when we are doing our ninth step, we have to be very careful that we do not parade the horribles to people who have had a long history with us. It is not proper for us to make them relive the horrors of the past, and we want to make our amends in the simplest possible way. And especially if we have an ongoing relationship with them, we're going to depend upon our behavior and our demonstrations of recovery and of love and of respect and so forth over a period of time to effect the healing of the wounds that we caused over a long period of time of our drinking or in our drug addiction. But the rule is the same. And there's a spiritual principle involved here that we have no right ever to harm another person, even though it will make us feel wonderful, perhaps, to get it off our chest. We have no right to do it, and as a matter of fact, we are forbidden to do anything deliberately which will harm another person. And there's a corollary to this. The corollary is that we are not permitted to allow another person to harm us. Why? Well, our journey here is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us, and to continue to do that for the rest of our lives. And we cannot be spiritually fit when we are blocked off from God. People who are harming us are blocking us from God. It may not be much, or it might be a whole lot, depending upon the source and the amount of harm they're doing. But we learn to say, stop right there. No, we'll have none of this. We get them to stop, or we get away from them. Now, many times we find ourselves caught up in situations where people are deliberately, maybe only out of force of habit or out of their own feelings of inadequacy, or maybe they're just dirty, rotten, stinking people. But they've been hurting us for a long time, perhaps, and they continue to do so. Sometimes we just have to suck it up and say, regardless of circumstances, I can no longer be around this person. I'm out of here. And as a sponsor, you can expect that you'll run into these situations from time to time. Remember, if your sponsee is being hurt over and over and over again, they have very little chance of recovery. Very little chance. Because this harm that's being done to them is blocking them and will continue to block them. We have no right to save our own skin at another person's expense. That's the rule. And as we get into the ninth step later, we're going to see that rule repeated. See how these steps just all work together, guys. It's all part of the same scheme. The scheme of spiritual growth leading toward a spiritual awakening. And each step is a part of that, but not by itself. It's a part with all the others, an essential part of this plan of recovery. Now here's an interesting part. Such parts of our story we tell to someone who will understand and not be affected by it. In other words, the Big Book is authority that we can give our fifth step to more than one person. And I've done that a few times in the past. With me, it's always arisen out of one particular circumstance, and we'll talk about this later, but before concluding the fifth step, we always ask, is there anything that we haven't discussed or that hasn't been revealed here which you're never going to tell another human being about? Something you're taking to your grave. You don't have to tell me what it is, but you must tell me if there is such a thing. And about half the time we're going to find that there's been something held back. Usually it's going to be sexual in nature or criminal in nature. Those are the two major things which are withheld. If the sponsee is not willing to tell you about it, you cannot complete the fifth step until they have revealed this to another person. You can have them go to their religious guy or their doctor. Somebody has got to be told before they can finish their fifth step, because holding something back is totally deadly. It destroys the whole purpose of the fifth step. just as a refusal to make amends to somebody will destroy the ninth step, yes.
How do you know for sure that they have shared?
You don't. Somewhere along the line, you have to trust them, but the way I do it is I ask them, well, tell me about this. You don't have to tell me what you said, but tell me about this this discussion. You know, how did it go? And did you find the person receptive? Did you have... you ask enough questions, you can tell pretty soon if they're making up answers. Yes, Tom?
You suppose you're sharing with somebody that you suppose or you assume that they're spiritually fit. You find out they're not, and they go and share this with somebody else, and then all kinds of problems happen, and other people get hurt. What have you seen happen?
Well, we don't have any electrodes we can stick on their brain and measure what's really going on. And but I think the answer is that over a period of time we develop an instinct. Wouldn't you say so? Janine has done 50 or 60 fifth steps or 100 by now. Don't you develop a kind of an instinct for what's going on?
I have them write down what they're going to say first, and then I look at it, and if it looks pretty good, I say, yeah, go ahead and go do it.
No, what I'm talking about is somebody who's worked the step, you assume has done all the steps, and you share with them. We're working the steps to get along with other people, correct? And
that's a big part of it, yeah.
And you share some with somebody who assumes spiritually fit, you find out they're not.
You're talking about, yeah.
And it hurts people.
Oh, sure. Well, that happens a lot. And I've been caught in that a number of times, but after a while, what I've learned is that nobody knows anything about me unless I absolutely decide they need to know. When I tell my story, I don't go into a lot of gory details. There are a few people who know me very well, and I have no problem talking to them about anything. Time tested and proven. I would say this to you guys. There's nothing wrong at all with being aware of what's going on around you and going on with the people you are associated with, and it is not wrong to be discriminating in the people that you have chosen to be intimate with, either sexually or intellectually or in a social sense. Nor is it wrong to be very careful about who you tell intimate secrets to. Personally, I think we need to be extremely careful about that. Now, sometimes, if you think it isn't going to matter what people hear about you and you don't care, then it doesn't matter. Personally, it matters to me. And maybe that's just me. I don't know of any acid test for that. But I do know this, that people who are rats get a reputation as a rat after a while, and if you ask around, you'll probably find out ahead of time. At the bottom of page 74, the last partial paragraph now. Notwithstanding the great necessity for discussing ourselves with someone, maybe one is so situated there's no suitable person available. If that is so, this step may be postponed only, however, if we hold ourselves in complete readiness to go through with it at the first opportunity. Now, that particular thought is really only applicable these days in some extreme circumstances where the person may be in a highly rural area or out where there is literally no contact with other AAs. It certainly is true in some foreign countries where AA is just getting started. We say this because we're very anxious that we talk to the right person. It is important that he be able to keep a confidence, that he fully understand, approve what we're driving at, that he will not try to change our plan, but we must not use this as a mere excuse to postpone. Now, this next paragraph begins to get us into the fifth step and, in fact, how a fifth step is conducted. It's an interesting commentary on the Big Book, guys, that many times the Big Book reduces a step to the most bare essentials, and sometimes in only 1 or 2 or 3 sentences. You remember when we were studying the first step back on page 30? The first step is defined on page 30 in one paragraph of 4 lines. And that's the whole first step. In spite of all of the other stuff that floats around out there, the first step is that we learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholic. This is the first step in recovery. The delusion we're like other people or presently may be has to be smashed. Period. That's the first step. And you notice the economy of words. The big book is very, very, very dense. Perhaps the most dense thing you'll ever read. Many sentences have 2 and sometimes 3 and even 4 profound thoughts in one sentence. And that's why we take it so slowly, and we try very hard to learn what the big book is telling us, not just to review it or to glance through it, but to study it. Now then, the first full paragraph then on page 75. When we decide who is to hear our story, we waste no time. We have a written inventory and we are prepared for a long talk. There is that one sentence tells us that the inventory is going to be the basis for our 5th step. Now let me explain how I do it. This is not in the book, but maybe this will be helpful to you. I've done a lot of these things. Not so many these days, since the word is out that I charge $250 to do a 5th step. Just one of those wonderful lies that gets floated around this program. $250 now.
I get $500 because I'm a younger fat tomorrow.
Well, that's right. Danny's upped his fee to $500 now. But notice that it mentions the 4th step because the 4th step then becomes the guide for the 5th step. And when you're hearing a 5th step, if you use the 4th step for that purpose, what will happen is that you've got an outline upon which you can proceed with the 5th step, but more than that, you can be sure then that you don't miss anything. And so the way I do it, and I teach people I sponsor to do it, we start right out with the resentments, and we go down through the resentments. Now you can start out, most people at the top of their list will be mommy or daddy, or husband or wife, or ex-husband, ex-wife, more likely. This person, whoever we start off with, will usually lead us on a trail. So let's say we start off with mommy, and then we'll find that automatically moves us into daddy, and then into our siblings, and maybe aunts and uncles or grandparents. So what you do is you just follow this trail as far as it goes. And each one continues to remind you of another. When you eventually reach the end of that trail, then you go back to make sure you pick up everybody who may have fallen through the cracks. And you just go right on through the resentment list this way, making sure that everybody who's on that list is discussed. And because remember that the resentment list is not about what your sponsee did, it is only about what they did to your sponsee. So we're going to talk about the harm that was done, the wrongs that were done, the fears which were engendered, the angers which came up, and perhaps the unfair actions of those who they resented. And this way we have not at all gotten into their wrongs, because in the big book and in the 12 steps in the big book, we do not indulge ourselves in comparative fault. We don't ask them to first talk about what Mommy did to them and then say, okay, wait just a second, Howie, and I'll get right to you.
Yeah.
And then say, okay, now let's see what you did to Mommy. Now, no wonder she did these things to you, look what you did to her. Or no wonder you did those things to her, look what she did to you. Comparative fault is no part of the fourth step in the Big Book, no matter what you may have heard or what you may have experienced from those who practice human solutions. And the reason for this is very simple. In order for us to most clearly see the wrongs that have been done us, so that when we pray for the people who have wronged us and we ask God for the willingness to forgive them, we haven't cluttered all of this up with the dynamics of a relationship. We've looked only to see the actions of another person so that we can be set free from those resentments. Yes, Howie?
My question, I'm going to use myself as an example. And I've been taught, if I'm not incorrect, that if I have a resentment towards somebody did a wrong to me, that the spiritual axiom of our 10th step, and without exception, it's always about me if it's upsetting for me.
There's no such thing as that being the spiritual maxim. That's somebody's theory, which is bandied about by people who have degrees in psychology. That if I am cognizant of a wrong that you've done me, or that a defect in your character, what I'm really doing is becoming aware of something wrong with me.
Yes.
That is absolutely untrue. Absolutely untrue. It doesn't even make sense.
Well, isn't it all perception?
No, it's reality. You see, when we're doing our four-step, we're not talking about perception. When you write a four-step resentment list, you're writing down what they did.
Right.
That's not perception. That's what they did. What did he do? What did he do to anger me, to threaten me, to wrong me, to make me angry, or that was unfair? His actions. That's all we're writing about, and this is not a question of perception. It's a question of actions.
It doesn't say in the Big Book somewhere that without exception, if somebody hurts me, whether it be a person, place, institution, that it's always about me.
No. Let me explain that, and that's a very good point. What the Big Book says, and let's all find it now, Howie's raised the question. Page 62, please. The last sentence in the first full paragraph on page 62. Who wants to read that out loud? Go ahead.
Most good ideas are simple, and this concept is keeps them in view of
Let's go to the please go to the first full paragraph, the last sentence in the first full paragraph. Sometimes they hurt us.
Sometimes they hurt us, seemingly without provocation. But we invariably find that at some time in the past we have made decisions based on self, which later placed us in a position to be hurt.
Right. We put ourselves in the position where somebody could hurt us. This does not mean that they were right to hurt us. And it doesn't mean they were wrong. What it means is that they hurt us. And our resentment list, it details the harm that they did by the actions they took. It does not ask us to analyze this to see whether we can visualize that we put ourselves in a place to be hurt because we were acting out of self. The second part of the fourth step addresses that directly, because there we are looking for selfishness and self-centeredness. In fact, we are looking for decisions based on self which put us in a position to be hurt. But that's the second part of the fourth step, not the first part. And it's an entirely separate view of what's going on with us, because you see, the purpose of the second part of the fourth step is for us to identify our selfishness, our dishonesty, and our fear, because these are cardinal defects which we have to fully understand in order for us to go to our 5th step with them and then to take them in our 7th step to God and ask Him to remove them. That's why we keep all this stuff separated. The fact that we may have done something which put us in a position to be harmed doesn't mean that we have any lesser resentment because of the harm that was done. And it's the resentment which is killing us. And we have to be rid of the resentment, don't we? In order to do that, we have to identify it. We have to pray for the people who harmed us, and we have to ask God for the willingness to forgive those actions they took which harmed us. Then we're set free from the resentment. And after that happens, then we go to look to see what we did. The second part of the 4th step is quite clear. There we will look at our selfishness. But we will not use that to excuse their wrongs. We use that to find out what there is about us that needs to be fixed. Does that make sense to everybody? I don't know how I can make it more clear. Separate these parts of the 4th step because they are meant to be separated. They have specific purposes in mind. The first part of the 4th step is to find out our resentments and to be set free from them. The second part of the 4th step is to find out about our dishonesty, our selfishness, and our fear, so that we can be set free from that. The third part of the 4th step is to identify our fears, so that we can begin to use the spiritual remedy for fear and be set free from fear. And the 4th part of the 4th step looks at our sex inventory so that we can identify again our selfishness and dishonesty in our relationships. Now when we get to the 4th part, we are specifically asked in that part to identify what we did in the relationships to cause harm to other people. And the purpose for that is for us to identify the people we need to make amends to. Does all this make sense? Howie, does it make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, Jim. Just square the bit of what I was talking about. Does it say, I can't...
417.
What page?
417. Second paragraph.
417?
Second paragraph.
Oh, yeah. Old Dr. Paul, he said some pretty good things and he screwed up big time in some of the stuff he said. Did you guys ever know him? I did. He just died about 2.5 years ago. And I knew him very well out in California. He says this, when I complain about me or about you, I'm complaining about God's handiwork. I'm saying that I know better than God. And he also says, I was always able to see the flaw in every person, every situation, and I was always glad to point it out because I knew you wanted perfection just as I did. AA and acceptance have taught me that there's a bit of good in the worst of us, a bit of bad in the best of us, and we're all children of God. We all have a right to be here. And let's see, what else did he say? Oh yeah. When I'm disturbed, it's because I find some person, place, thing, or situation, some fact of my life unacceptable to me, and I can find no serenity until I accept that person, place, thing, or situation as being exactly the way it's supposed to be at this moment. And so I have found, if I'm complaining about you, I have found something unacceptable in you, and I'm relating that to some fact of my life which is unacceptable about me. Well, that's psychobabble, because there are rules, there are consequences, there are absolutes, and there are people who are absolutely mean, rotten, nasty, stinking, and no damn good, and they do terrible things. And there isn't any way that we are going to back away from that and say they didn't do those things. I'm imagining it because what I saw in them is what I really see in myself. That's nonsense. And it doesn't help any. Dr. Paul was trying to make a point here, guys. He was trying to make a point which revolves around the problem of dependency And it was fully explored by Bill in an article entitled Toward Emotional Sobriety. And let me see if I can find what he had to say. If we examine every disturbance we have, great or small, we will find at the root of it some unhealthy dependency and its consequent unhealthy demand. And what he's saying here is that if I depend upon you and you disappoint me, or you let me down, or you don't do what I expected you to do, in other words, you violate my expectations of you, that then I'm going to be highly disturbed, and that the real problem is not the fact that you did what comes naturally to you, but that I allowed myself to be in a position of expecting you to act differently. And that therefore, when you did not act differently, I found myself greatly disturbed by that. This has absolutely nothing to do with the commission of wrongs and harm, the deliberate instigation of threat, which causes fear, the being unjustifiably mean, rotten, and nasty to somebody. A lot of people suffer a great deal from that. What Dr. Paul is talking about, what Bill is talking about, is this: if I have a very close relationship with somebody, let's say my dear friend Bonnie sitting back there. Now, in my relationship with Bonnie, I've come to rely upon her and to depend upon her to fulfill a lot of my emotional needs and wants and desires. But in the process of becoming dependent upon her, what I also do is that I build up a whole set of expectations of Bonnie. How she is to behave herself, how she is to treat me, the things I expect her to do. But I never told her about it. These are all unarticulated expectations, the most dangerous kind of thing we can involve ourselves in. Because Bonnie never agreed to do these things, I expected her, and I go to my bright-eyed friends and I say, "Oh, of course you're right. Well, she should do this. She shouldn't do that." And so I'm totally bolstered in these expectations, which I've never talked to Bonnie about. She has no idea that I have them. And now she violates these expectations, and now I'm angry, and now I'm frustrated, and now I've got a wonderful bunch of self-pity that I can run out to my bright-eyed friends and tell them about, and they'll say, "Oh yes, you poor guy, you better get rid of her, because she's no damn good." And it's all a bunch of baloney. Balderdash. If I've got an expectation of you, and I don't tell you what it is, shame on me. Moreover, if I don't have your commitment to live up to that expectation, and I still expect it, shame on me. If you make a commitment and then you violate it, shame on you. But you see, that's gone way beyond the concept of dependency. Because in a dependent relationship, we manufacture all of the expectations of how the other person is to be and to act. And then when they don't live up to those, we get very disturbed. Bill just said in that thing I just read that every disturbance he has, great or small, at the root of it is some dependency he's allowed to develop. And these dependencies, believe me, are always, always sick. The Big Book makes it clear. We cannot have dependencies on other people. All of our dependency must be upon God. Now it goes way beyond dependency if we have an agreement. If Bonnie and I sit down and I tell her this is what I expect and she said I agree, and here's what I expect, and then I say I agree. That's contract. That's different. Now, I can legitimately expect Bonnie to live up to her agreement, and she can legitimately expect me to live up to mine. That's a whole different story. But if you think about it, each one of you, think about your expectations of other people, you will find that in almost every case they are unarticulated, unenunciated. They don't even know you expect it. It's not necessary that they know, because everybody tells you, well, that's of course what they ought to do. You should do that. She should do that. And you're a good doggy. You see, yeah. And so you see the kinds of holes that we dig for ourselves with this sort of stuff. And as a sponsor, you've got to see this. Literally, everybody that you work with, especially those who are new, is going to become loaded to you with all kinds of dependencies. And one of the most important things we do as a sponsor is we help people learn how to stand on their own 2 feet. We teach them how to clean house, trust God, stand on their own 2 feet, take responsibility for their own actions, take responsibility for the consequences of their actions, and begin to live their life in accordance with spiritual principles. Now, when you can teach them to do that, their whole life's going to change. We have a written inventory. We're prepared for a long talk. We're going to use the inventory as a guide to make sure that we don't leave anything out. We explain to our partner what we're about to do and why we have to do it. He should realize that we are engaged in a life and death errand. Most people approached in this way will be glad to help. They'll be honored by our confidence. I would suggest strongly to you that you have approached someone who has, at the very least, an established reputation for honesty, integrity, closed mouth, and has demonstrated these qualities. And you might want to talk to people who have worked with this person in the past and are satisfied that these things are true. Once in a while, everybody who is a new sponsor has to start somewhere. You don't have a track record. Very, very important then that you remember what you ask for in the 3rd step prayer, that God take away your difficulties so that He can make an example to you of His power and His love and His way of life working in and through you, so that others can see that. And that means you will be able to help them, because they will instinctively realize that you're living a spiritual way of life and that you are demonstrating in your life God's power and His love and His way of life. And that will get you the people you need to sponsor. They'll come to you. And by the way, if you have any doubt about it, you have a little switch in your head. And if you turn that switch to on, it means I'm ready to sponsor. And Janine's sitting here, she can tell you the minute you flip that switch, watch out, because they all know it and they start coming to you right away, don't they? It's just, it's like magic what happens. Once you decide that you're ready, you flip that switch and people hear it some way or another.